Welcome to Tech Notice. Intel 12900KS, 64GB of DDR5, super fast SSD, RTX 3090ti, one of the world's most expensive motherboards, and a case I bet you've never seen before because this is 90 degrees rotated.
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out WhoKeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below.
Well, let's build this PC. Alrighty then, so the build is complete. It was very interesting in a lot of different ways, and especially if you want to use some of these parts in your build, I highly recommend you just wait and see the minus sides or like a little bit of the downsides or weird quirks as well that we're going to go into in a moment. But first of all, I want to test a few things. I want to test the cooling and the GPU cooling as well, because I'm not sure if you knew that, but this is a little bit of a different GPU than usual 3090s because it's overclocked from the factory, so it pulls a little bit more than, you know, the usual. First of all, let's try the CPU, okay? We've got the CPU up on the side here, because this is a 12900KS, which is like the best of Intel. I haven't actually benchmarked this yet, so this is the first system I've put this in. So we're gonna crack that on. We're gonna hit that on the side. Let's see what happens straight away. We're pulling, whoa, 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 wow. Okay, that's quite something there. 327 watts. As you can see, it tries to boost all core 5.1 gigahertz stock. Like, I haven't overclocked this. This is just literally up with the BIOS set to like just default, nothing there. No XMP on, literally nothing. So I've set the camera here as well for the power draw. The whole system is drawing 493 watts at the moment, which is ridiculous. And as you can see, it's been running now for about 4 minutes and we're still like 100 degrees Celsius. And this is not because of really the bad cooling, because I can see the liquid temperature inside the liquid is 36 degrees. So the liquid is actually able to cool down. I did a very good thermal paste like application and everything, like, you know, spread it out on there. It's just because the CPU is just so hot in there that there's no way to get it out. As you can see, it still tries to boost over 5 gigahertz, but now after a few minutes, you can see that the performance cores are now 5 gigahertz. The efficiency cores are still about 4, but it's now even going further lower than 5 gigahertz there. As you can see, our package power is now 294 watts rather than 327 watts. Now, just so you are aware how ridiculous this power draw is and how bad of a like kind of temperature problem this is that if we take a Threadripper Pro, we did the Threadripper 3090ti build recently, and that is 280 watts TDP from the factory. It's a massive die and it's just pushed through 280 watts. It's ridiculous. It's got 64 cores and so on, and I'm putting a U14S from Noctua cooler on that cooler, and that's going to run about 50-60 degrees Celsius depending on the room temperature and so on and how long you do this, but easily like 70 70 degrees Celsius air cooled. This is liquid cooled and we're pushing 327 watts. It's ridiculous amount of power just being pushed through there. But as you can see, it still tries to boost 5.1 and then comes back to 5 and kind of settles somewhere about 5 there. And that's roughly where it's going to land there. I'm going to stop that here because I'm feeling a little bit sad about my electricity bill after making these videos. The loudest thing probably is the actual CPU fan. There's an actual fan underneath the AIO as well that's gonna blow down on the CPU and then around it, kind of cooling the, you know, VRMs around the CPU as well, which is cool, you know, it's very nice, but it makes a lot of noise. So that's like the loudest part in there. If you wanna see the full benchmarks and a review of that CPU, hit the subscribe button, stay tuned because it's coming up, especially for creators. If you're one of those, you're gonna love that. Let's see how does the GPU handle the heat, because as you can see, the GPU here, we're pushing through 478 watts right now. That's absolutely ridiculous. The fans are going really loud on the GPU and it's actually pushing quite a lot of the hot air like against the window, and then it kind of goes up something over there. But I've got one fan just underneath the GPU configured that's measuring the GPU temperature, and it's pushing cold air up directly to the GPU when that's going there. That GPU is really sounding like a hairdryer. The room temperature is 23.4 degrees and the system power draw is 655 watts. Wow, that's a lot. The hotspot is 103 degrees and it's constantly rising and rising and rising. And the GPU temperature is 91.7 degrees. The memory is 86. The memory is good. I think that's because of the 3090 Ti's. The memory is actually on the like bottom side of the PCB rather than on the top side, which means it's going to get better cooling. As you can see, it keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. So I'm not sure if this is the best orientation or the case design. I can feel the glass is very, very warm here. I'm not even touching this, but it's like heat's coming out from there. So then let's talk about some of the good sides about this PC build and what I really like when building this, or what was my experience then. First of all, the top IO of this case, or like the idea of this, I like it a lot. The motherboard IO is on the top as well, which I like a lot. Secondly, Noctua fans. Wow, it's so nice to get these fans here and finally get them working, because if you've ever used any of the Noctua stuff, you're just gonna fall in love with them. They're just absolutely amazing. The look, the performance, the sound, everything is just absolutely amazing. So what I'm talking about are these Noctua Chromax NFA 12x25 fans. So these are like probably one of the best fans in the world if you want them. They're 120 millimeters and we've got 5 of them. We've got 4 on the bottom and then 1 on the top as exhaust. They're just so quiet. The performance is absolutely amazing. Like, you can't hear the Noctua fans, you can hear everything else. I can hear the pump, I can hear the AIO fans, but I can't quite hear the Noctua fans. Next, the holes in the back of the case. So basically there's a hole in the top and on the bottom of the case where you can have your cables to run out. So you can have the cables like power cables or whatever cables running out from the top if you want to, or route them all the way down from the back side of the case and let them come out from the bottom, which means that your case is actually going to have very nice cable management and all the cables are coming out from the bottom. I like that a lot. Usually you're just gonna have like a big bunch of cables coming out from the middle and it just looks random, whereas this case, the cable management coming out from the case is quite nice. Next, the cooler. This cooler, the MSI Core Liquid S360, there's different versions as well. There's like 360R, it's completely different cooler, but the S360, it's basically the one with the screen on the top and then you have the fans and everything, you know, on there. I think this is a very, very good cooler actually. If you're familiar with like coolers, this is actually the Acertech cooler. So it's the same cooler as we have the ROG Ryujin cooler from ASUS, or for example, Fantex has their Fantex Glacier 1. It's exactly the same cooler, just they look different, but the pump, the actual tubes, radiator, they're exactly the same. But I do think it's a very good cooler because we can see the PC and CPU think, look, we can push quite a lot of wattage out from there. 327 watts push through. The cool fans are very similar to the Noctua NFA12X25 fans. I think the MSI tried to copy that design because they knew that this is just one of the best fans. If we're not hammering those fans, they actually work rather quiet, and mediocre and lower end use, they're absolutely fine. The screen on the cooler is very helpful as well. I like to see the CPU and the actual liquid temperature from there. You can configure it and make it look and say whatever you want. You can have the weather information there or all sorts of things. But I think this is just a very helpful thing for me to see. I can glance over, see the CPU and liquid temperature. I know everything is good, everything's going fine. One quirk or cool thing is I think it might have a gyro inside there. When I turned it on, it automatically knew that the CPU block is installed this way and where is up and down, so the text was on it already the right way. The motherboard has a screen there as well, just so you know. I highly recommend you go check out the motherboard review as well, where we go a little bit more in detail about the motherboard, what it is, but it's an absolutely bonkers motherboard. But there you can configure it to show whatever temperature there as well, which is very, very nice as well. The actual screen, you can plug it into one of the USB ports on the back of the motherboard and then actually show the screen externally somewhere where if you want to just put it somewhere else, you know, on your case. Anyway, just like a cool feature if you want to have some temperature or some stats show externally outside of your case. The motherboard has very good power delivery, and this is like meant really for overclocking, but this is why we see 325 and 27 watts pulled from the socket. Next of all, the SSD inside this system, which is the MSI M480 Spatium, and I have the M480 Spatium Play version, which is basically meant for like PS5s because it already comes with a heatsink, but you can buy it with like 2 separate heatsinks, I think, and without the heatsink. I'm not sure if you've heard about this SSD before, but when digging a little bit deeper into this SSD, I was very impressed. Especially if you are a creator, you need to know about this SSD and have a look or check out some of the pricing on this when buying your SSD. Because first of all, the speeds of this are absolutely ridiculously fast. As you can see, I've done the crystal disk mark here. The read speed is 6.6 gigabytes per second, write speed 6.8, and the random 4K very fast as well. It's not gonna get much better than that. Some of the drives can push a little bit faster, but this is like right up there with like as fast as you can, like literally Samsung 980 Pro, Seagate 530, FireCuda 530, Kingston KC3000, like all of the top of the line, you know, SSDs there. Even Western Digital 8, SN850 and so on. They score like maybe 100, 200, 300 megabytes better in sequential read and write speeds, but basically very, very similar. But the absolutely fantastic thing about this SSD is, pause for effect, the terabytes written spec. Now, if you don't know what that means, it's basically how many times can each cell on the flash or the SSD be rewritten over and over again. I've got another video explaining the terabytes written spec and why this is important for creators. If you haven't seen that one, go check that one out. 1,400 terabytes written. That's per 1 terabyte drive. Now, if you look at some of the other drives that are out there, for example, Samsung 980 Pro. So I'm looking at the Samsung specs here. This Samsung drive is 600 terabytes written spec. So it's more than twice as good in that. That means that 767 gigabytes can be written on the drive every single day and deleted it for the next 5 years, and you're gonna have no problems with it. Now, this is even better than the Seagate FireCuda 530 terabytes per written spec. As you can see, this is 1,275 there, which is absolutely fantastic. Usually you see something like 700 terabytes per written specs or something like that. But if you're a creator using large files, you're constantly hammering or transferring big footage from, you know, your shoots you're putting on the drive. Definitely a drive worth checking out. Highly recommend it. What I also like is the PSU size is actually very compact, and if you're looking for a 1000 watt compact, you know, ATX size power supply, especially if you don't have a lot of room for a cable management or you want to keep your hard drive cage on the bottom of the case, this could be a good option. Not so much of a good thing, but more surprise thing is that I didn't actually know that you can have 3090 Ti's that pull like close to 500 watts from the socket. Now, is this the best 3090 Ti in the world? I don't know yet because I haven't tested all. I've tested the Asus TUF 3090 Ti, and this one, the TUF is pulling like 450 watts, not more than that. This is pulling a little bit more. We're gonna benchmark this as well, so if you want to see, you know, future videos where we can actually benchmark this and see if this is any better, subscribe for those videos. I want to do the test to see if the PC is going to turn off when we're going to hammer it in Cinebench and Firmark at the same time. CPU, start. GPU, start. Let's have a look at this. 950 watts. 960 watts pulled from the socket. Is that any good? There we go. 314 watts CPU and 480 watts GPU. We're not actually hitting quite that 1000 watts there. What else can we do? Plug more fans in, let them run at 100%, but all the fans at the moment are running at 100% there. I think at the moment, this is not very good for the CPU. As you can see, it is actually pulling quite a bit less than before, just because the GPU is pushing or absolutely hair drying the hot air on the tubes that are going over the GPU, because you can't really put them underneath because there's so many cables and so on. If running a smaller GPU inside the system, then probably better to put the tubes underneath there, because as you can see, it's just thinking, no, we can't quite do that because the tubes are warming up. I can see the liquid temperature is 39 C, so it's much warmer than previously. But hey, it actually works. So let's talk about the downsides now. The AIO installation on the case. As you can see in some of the B-roll, the AIO install was a right pain, just because the rails that go in the back where you screw your screws in, they're just a random size, which means that if you take the AIO out, which like the rails are for, it's nice to have the rails off. You can put your AIO in there and then put it in the case. You can't do that because the rails are too long. It's not going to fit in there. So you're going to have to somehow install your AIO while screwing through the back holes, somehow trying to line the screws on. It's not very well thought through, and I think this is a fault of the case design. Another thing I want to mention is the random spacing for the bottom holes of the fans. There are like 4 kind of holes spacing for 120mm fans. It can fit for 120mm fans, but then on one side of the kind of fans, you can't screw in the last holes because the holes quite aren't long enough for you to screw in. So the weird thing is you can put 4 fans in there like I have, but you can't screw the last 2 screws in because the holes aren't wide enough. And the actual holes are almost made for, I don't know, like 100mm, 92mm fans or something like that. It's a little bit random kind of spacing or design underneath there. Also, this PSU shroud shape here, I think is a little bit odd, just because why it's tilted up this way, it just doesn't quite work. I think it should have been tilted that way so that the fourth fan that's on the bottom over here would push the air out, and then the shroud would kind of guide the air like to the middle and then out from here, because at the moment it just goes in here and then comes back to against the glass. So there's kind of like a blockage of airflow in the bottom there that doesn't quite work, and there's no holes on the bottom, so it's not actually even cooling the power supply or anything there either. Knowing what you pay for the case, I'm a little bit disappointed in the case quality, just because if you look at even the top like kind of panel, it's a little bit bent, and like often when you put it on, just like naturally, as you can see, it like kind of bends like that. And there's a few things like that as well where I can see already like dents a little bit in there. And I think for what I'm paying for the case, I don't really think this is a good quality case. Now, there's nothing bad for it, but for about that price, I would expect something much better. Talking about the case, the actual cable management on the back is a little bit poor because it just hasn't been thought through, and because everything is kind of laid the wrong way, 90 degrees and so on. I found a little bit of a weird cable management there. There's not like a lot of straps where you can put in and so on. So I think the cable management can be a little bit better in the back. That brings me to the other question is, why is the backside of the case glass? Because you're not going to see anything from there anyway. Is it just to match like the both sides so that they're like symmetrical? I get that, but why is it glass though still? As always, we have DDR5 problems. XMP doesn't work with 4 sticks. You can probably somehow get it manually working if you go into the BIOS setting and adjust the timings and frequencies and so on. But I think if you are paying $1,800 for the motherboard or somewhere around there, you'd probably expect put your RAM in there, press XMP on, and it just works out of the box. But that is not the case. But I think that's a little bit of like an early adopters, early platform fault. When talking about the motherboard, the Armory kit that actually goes on it, like those metal cool little strips that can go over the top and the bottom to kind of hide all your cable management, all your mess. The thing is, the screw holes for those standoffs that go instead of the screws, you know, to your motherboard, that the standoffs are kind of like screws. They're a bit longer. You screw them into the motherboard so it holds the motherboard inside your case, but at the same time gives a standoff for this little metal bracket so you can just slot it in there. The thing is, those standoffs have thicker screw threads, and about half of the cases that I have had on the channel, sometimes they have thicker screws and sometimes a thinner screw, and not screws, but screw threads that you screw the screws onto the motherboard. Now, this motherboard comes with the thicker screws, but my motherboard has actually thinner screw threads so that I can't actually use these things, which is just random. It's a bit of a bummer. And last thing about the motherboard is that I understand that this is for overclocking and really like PC enthusiasts and not so much for creators. But I do think that a very important thing to have on a motherboard, especially if you're running the Intel chips, is a video output for the iGPU. Just if your iGPU breaks or if you want to run it, you know, without the GPU or something like that, you could do that. But we don't have that on this motherboard. All in all, I do think this is a very interesting build. And as much as there's the quirks, I do somehow love the kind of twisted look. It's absolutely bonkers and like doesn't make a lot of sense, but building it was great fun. Getting to work, seeing like 300 and whatever X watts pulled from the socket is absolutely amazing as well. Do I recommend this type of thing? I think in this particular configuration, I don't think, you know, maybe this makes the most sense. I'd probably get a little bit of a smaller GPU, maybe a little bit of the downgrade on the CPU as well, like 12700K or something like that. But other than that, I do enjoy this a lot. If you want to pick any of these things up or check them out, I'm going to leave the links for all of these in the description below.